program today. There'll be plenty of time to chat afterwards in our reception. I'm Jennifer Davis, co-organizer of this event with John, and I am delighted to welcome to CUA my friend and my colleague, Yaniv Fox. Professor Fox is an associate professor of history at Bar-Ilan University, vice dean of humanities, and head of AI initiatives. So Professor Fox is, like me, a historian of early medieval Europe. His first monograph, published in 2014, was a study of the monastic movement associated with the Irish Saint Columbanus and the intersections between politics and religion, which shaped this pivotal form of early medieval monasticism. His recent 2023 monograph examined how the Frankish Merovingian dynasty, the most successful of the post-Roman successor states in the West, has been remembered in historical sources stretching from the 6th century to the 16th century. He's also worked on a range of topics, including interreligious relations and diplomatic contact between East and West in the early medieval world. His most recent work, however, is a bit of a new departure. He will publish a book later this year with Cambridge University Press on how to use AI in historical research. As AI began to emerge as a possibly transformative tool for both scholarship and teaching, Professor Fox embraced this emerging new technology, seeking to understand both what it can do, but also what it cannot. So once again, not all of the humanists are in the bright red category. So taking a leading role in exploring these issues at his university, he oversees the development and implementation of AI tools for research, teaching, and administration. He teaches several courses on AI use for both students and faculty, has developed an AI-assisted tutor, and written an AI ethics code for Bar-Ilan. He also works as a consultant for a number of companies seeking to integrate AI into their workflows. Now, it is fair to say that many of us have responded to the burgeoning prevalence of AI in academia with concern and/or confusion. Figuring out how best to educate our students in a world of easily available AI tools and how to employ AI ourselves with awareness of both its potential and its challenges is a highly difficult task. And I am so pleased to have Professor Fox here to help us all learn more about how to operate in the new emerging AI paradigm we find ourselves in. Professor Fox.
Okay, so maybe I'll move here. Thank you kindly, Jennifer, for the invitation and for the kind words, and John also for the hospitality. And of course, thank you all for coming. As Jennifer has said, I am not an AI guy. I'm certainly not a coder. What I am is a historian. So specifically, I do late antique and early medieval history in the Latin West. That means I have zero professional training as either a coder or someone who works with neural networks or anything of that kind. Actually, as far as my own professional involvement with AI, it kind of started out as an accident. It started out as a hobby, not with ChatGPT, but actually with DALL-E 2, if you can remember way back when. That was when actually those image generation models became popular. And one of my kids was inventing a story about a bird laying eggs inside a straw hat, and the chicks, in the straw hat. And I said, well, maybe I'll try to generate an image of that. And so, one thing led to another, and I was kind of playing around with DALL-E and with image generation models. And then ChatGPT came, and ChatGPT pretty much revolutionized how we approach teaching. And it has certainly transformed my own approach to both teaching and research, and has kind of taken my academic career in very unexpected directions, I should say. So over the last 2 years, I've been leading an institutional effort to integrate AI into the various arms of the university at which I work. That is Bar-Ilan University in Israel. Now, by Israeli standards, Bar-Ilan is a fair-sized university. It's got 2 campuses, one in the center of Israel and one up north with a medical school. It's got 12 schools and roughly 22,000 students, last count. And we do have many computer scientists that study AI and that develop AI tools, but we don't really have anyone who is in charge of AI policy and thinking about how AI fits into our institutional policy. And so this role was carved out, I guess, especially to accommodate that need. And I have been the first to occupy this role, and that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And what I want to do today is to talk about my own personal experience as head of AI initiatives and how that's influenced my own thinking about what to do with this AI problem, and also how my home institution has been thinking about AI and how that thinking has evolved over the last 2 years. So this talk will have 3 subjects, 3 sections. The first being AI in teaching. I know that's something that's on everyone's mind. The talks that we've just heard have touched upon these issues. And certainly we know that teaching is at an inflection point, at a certain crisis point, and that AI breaks old patterns of evaluation and that new proxies of evaluation are needed. The second topic I want to talk about is faculty. I don't know if that seems like a problem, but it's been my experience that the reaction of faculty and our approach towards faculty and really the way to think about AI is to think about it as a problem, not a problem, but a situation that needs addressing by the academic community as a whole. So what I want to talk about is really my function as mediating between faculty and administration, both of these having slightly different opinions about how AI should be approached and thought about. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about research, how I've used it myself, and I will showcase some examples. And finally, how I've trained others to use this. I'm now coming off of a first cohort of a course designed particularly for our research community. So I'll share a little bit about that. Even though I am a medieval historian, I hope that these lessons are transferable to other disciplines and applicable really in any academic discipline. In fact, none of this is really intimately tied to early medieval history. It is more a question of culture. And that's something that I've been rehearsing to no end to anyone who would listen, is that the successful application of AI is more a question of corporate and, in this case, academic culture. And I really want to drill down on that, and so I will talk about that. Okay, so a little bit about my own journey with AI. In November 2022, we all know ChatGPT dropped, and the world was never the same since. And so I heard about it. I heard about it from a colleague. You hear about this GPT thing, and okay, I'll give it a try. And so the first thing that I did was I gave it an assignment that I had given my students that same week. And it was an assignment about Theodoric and the Ostrogoths. And it came back, and remember, this was ChatGPT 3.5, the very early version, and it came back with an answer that at that time I would have graded as a strong A, right? And it just kind of blew my socks off. I was amazed, and I tried to communicate the sense of urgency to my colleagues, and I have to say they weren't that impressed. So I realized there was something going on with the reaction to to ChatGPT, and that not all people will have the same reaction. And so the months kind of went by, and I started using custom GPTs for my classes. So at first I was doing this just, as a little experiment. I fed ChatGPT my lectures for my course. I have an introductory course called Introduction to the Early Middle Ages. It's a course for undergraduate freshmen. It's probably the first course that they attend when they start their history degree. And what I did is I basically gave it my lesson plans, and I gave it a little prompt, and I said, okay, go play around with this. I integrated it into our LMS, and that was that. And then October 7th happened, right? And October 7th was a huge breaking point in Israel and regionally, of course, And overnight, a lot of my students, our students, were called into military service, so they were absent. We had hundreds of students who were displaced because their homes were coming under rocket fire. And we had a lot of students who were spouses, partners of people who were otherwise affected. And so overnight, basically, academic work had ground to a halt. And so at that point, I still didn't make the connection. And then I was sitting in my office and, just having coffee with a colleague. And she is she used to work for the Division of Teaching and Learning, which is a university organization tasked with innovative teaching methodology and upskilling faculty. And I was telling her about custom GPTs, which had not been popular at that point still. And she said, this is perfect for our student body. You should show this to the president. And so before long, I showed it to the president, and he was enthusiastic about it. He gave the green light, and he gave us a little money to start out, and we launched a pilot. And this pilot was made up initially of 20 courses, and we tried to make those courses representative of the different schools of the university. So we had STEM, we had the law school, we had everybody there. One course per school, and then some additional. And we started on this 3 to 4 month pilot where we built custom GPTs for each of these courses. Now, because my experience with using custom GPTs was so smooth, I guess, I kind of naively expected it to be smooth for that pilot. And it turned out that there was a key friction point. And for me, at least, it was unexpected. And that key friction point is that every professor, every lecturer, every teacher approaches the course with a different agenda and a different methodology in mind, right? So there are those who meticulously prepare lecture notes. I'm one of those. I go into class, I have a document that pretty much covers everything that I want to talk about. There are those who go in with scribbled hand notes, just, main points that they want to depart from. We all know those people. And then there are those who show up with slide decks, either elegant ones or not so elegant ones, doesn't really matter. And then there are those phenomenal people who go in blank and just improvise, and it's probably great every time. But nothing prepared me for that, because custom GPTs need to rely on context. And context means, in this context, it means documentation. It means the lectures. It means the material. And not everybody has that material. So most of the effort during that pilot was dedicated exactly to that, to training faculty to think about how to make their knowledge, their expertise, their teaching material legible and decipherable by AI. This went on for a few months. Then we had questionnaires. We circulated questionnaires to all of the students who participated, to all of the faculty who participated. And I have to say, it was pretty successful in the sense that most students wanted to see more of this in more of their courses. And so now it is being rolled out university-wide. And what the novelty is about the second iteration of the bots, as we can call them, is that they are built into the LMS. So what this means is that if a professor wants to have a bot in her course, she doesn't need to feed it anything because it extracts information directly from the LMS from sources that she had already uploaded, like the primary sources or the articles or whatever it is, right? And since the LMS that we're using is an open source LMS, then that's possible, okay? And so I still don't have results on this. It's currently happening as we speak, but that was the first iteration of my brush with AI on an institutional level. The second part of this story was I was vice dean of humanities at the time. I'm done. I finished. But we had a work group of vice deans, and don't you know, the topic of AI came up, as it often does. And so the vice provost, who was heading this group of vice deans, says we really need an ethics code. Like we really need an institutional posture for how to go about, dealing with this thing. You're the AI guy. You did the pilot. Go write this thing, right? So, I mean, how do you start writing an ethics code? This was 2024. It was relatively early still. In AI terms, this is an eternity. And so I started looking for ethics codes to learn from. There weren't many. What there were mostly policy papers from the EU. And so I started compiling everything that I could get my hands on. And that was the first time that I started playing around with Notebook LM, which I'm sure a lot of you know as a very, very useful resource. If you don't know it, I urge you to go around and play with it. It's a great resource. But anyway, I came back with this document. And the document endured into what later became the ethics code with one important change. And this change was actually initiated by our vice provost, who is a law professor, and was wise enough to decide that the use of AI would be opt out instead of opt in. So it is the default at Bar-Ilan that it's okay, right? You're allowed to use AI. So what was the vice provost's thinking, and what was our thinking about deciding to make AI permissible by default? And so the first thing I think is that AI, as far as we can tell, is a critical skill for graduates. We do not envisage a future where AI is not part of any employment landscape. And so to make our graduates attractive employees, employable, we feel it's a duty, right, to teach them how to use AI. And so that was certainly one of the deciding factors. The second is that banning AI or severely restricting it puts the professor or faculty or whoever it is in a position of policing students. We don't want to be in that position ever, right? Policing students erodes the trust that we have with students, and it turns the whole experience of learning into something unpleasant. And so we really wanted, to the best of our ability, to steer away from that kind of philosophy. And the third reason, I guess the most pragmatic reason, was that it's just too late. The horses are out of the stable, right? Even if we don't allow it, we have no way of actually banning it. The only thing we're going to do is we're going to drive the usage underground. And that's even worse. So that all drove our decision that this is going to be permitted. It's going to be opt out with one caveat. And that is that individual professors have the right to decide what happens in their own courses, right? So if a professor is very uncomfortable with AI, they're allowed to say, okay, I don't want this in my course. Or I want this in my course, but I don't want it all the way. Like I want some aspects of the course to be protected from AI. And as an institution, we completely respect the professor's sovereignty, even though I can say that we gently encourage professors to experiment with it. And we know that experimentation will lead to a reformulation of evaluation and a rethinking about everything the course entails, and we would encourage that. But we don't force it on anyone who's not willing to do it. And another thing is that the majority of assignments in our university are handed in through the LMS, right? There's an assignment rubric. And we did automate this so that whenever a student uploads an assignment into the assignment rubric in the LMS, they get a pop-up with the ethics code, right? And so they have to say, okay, I've read the ethics code, and this is how I've used AI. I've either not used it at all, but if I have used it, there are 12 scenarios where we thought that AI might be used in academic work, and they have to tick off their uses. We don't do this to punish them or to restrict them. We really do this in order to get a better sense of how they're using it so that we can adapt our teaching strategies accordingly, right? So this is the situation still, even though I do recognize that it's kind of growing a little long in the tooth. It is 2026 now, and we might need to return to our ethics code and reevaluate it because things have changed. And actually, I think ethics codes should never be static monuments, right? They should be living documents because the technology is working its magic so fast that we really need to convene at least every semester to revisit the code and see where adjustments need to be made. Okay. So now I want to address the elephant in the room, right? Which is how to work with AI in the context of academic teaching. So spoiler, right? I don't have a definite answer. I do have a best practices methodology, albeit one that is constantly being reevaluated and changed. The first reaction everywhere in 2023, early 2023, was either to ban it or to at least severely restrict it. And as we've heard, it doesn't really work. And it doesn't really work for, a variety of reasons that we've all become acquainted with. One is what the campus blocks the home computer allows. Students are just going to use it anyway and not report. Secondly, that faculty is stuck in this constant loop of suspicion. And thirdly, and this is something that students point out, is if I can't use it, why can you, the professor, use it, right? And for the interests of fairness and reciprocity, then we would sentence ourselves to non-usage. And I think that's not a good solution, right? Because not using it means that we can't really enjoy the advantages of it automating away a lot of the administrative overhead, a lot of the kind of work that we're not really interested in doing, and free up time for one-on-one tutorship, for drilling down on difficult topics, for really doing the kinds of teachings that we're enthusiastic about, right? So just in the interest of fairness, I think if we want to let ourselves use it, we have to let the students use it, right? So what is the alternative path here? Well, one is to assume that AI usage will happen. It's inevitable, right? It's going to happen. And what we need to do is to redesign academic goals so that AI does not undermine them. And I'll get into more detail about what that entails in a minute. I think the decisive point, as far as I'm concerned, is to distinguish the skill from the proxy. And what do I mean when I say this? AI kills the proxy, not the skill. Let's take an example of the academic essay, right? Well, when we assign an essay, is it really the essay we're after, or is it the skills underpinning that essay that we're interested in teaching and we're interested in ensuring that our students know? So we really need to scratch the surface of the modality of the evaluation and get to the core. What are the skills that we're really insistent that our students have? Okay. I think even though the essay is compromised, critical thinking or whatever it is that we're after is still important. Okay, so we really need to think about how we evaluate for that. So we know the take-home essay is broken, right? AI detection doesn't work. And it doesn't work for a variety of reasons. Firstly, because the actual software doesn't do most of the time what it says it will do. I've really kind of gotten into checking these softwares myself on things that I've generated and things that I've written, and I can tell you it is very, very easy to deceive this software. I don't mean like some Herculean efforts. I mean very simple copy and pastes will throw it off track. But secondly, and this has been demonstrated by a lot of research, people who are not speakers, first language speakers of the assignments that they are expected to submit are disproportionately flagged, right? And so we're doing a double disservice to these weakened populations that not only have to overcome the language barrier, but now have to overcome this constant monitoring of this family of software. Finally, I want to say using AI is not plagiarism. Okay, we really need to get rid of that frame of mind. Don't equate AI usage with plagiarism. Teach responsible usage instead. And what that means, I will say in a minute. Now, there's an immediate retort to this, and this is something that people have told me, and especially people who are enthusiastic about teaching literature in English, but also history and other humanities and text-rich disciplines. They say, writing is thinking, right? We formulate ideas through writing. And this really is true to some extent for some people, okay? True for some, but not for all. A lot of people are visual thinkers, right? They use visual cues to arrive at ideas. A lot of people talk through their ideas, so they're verbal thinkers. And I think this skill, this type of ideation process will become more prevalent as AI tools mature. And a lot of people will find that talking through their ideas and visualizing their ideas with the help of AI tools can sometimes successfully replace that skill of writing is thinking. I'm not trying to say that writing is never thinking, right? Writing is thinking is good for people who use writing to think. It's not good for everyone. Now, when we assign writing, I think what we're actually testing, when we look honestly at what the essay is meant to accomplish, it's meant to see if students can express complex ideas elegantly, right? That's an important skill. We want students to be able to observe and engage with an idea from different perspectives. We want to see them string different arguments along to converge into some coherent argument or claim or conclusion. And finally, we want them to engage critically with sources. And I think all of these skills still matter, right? Even in the age of AI, the essay as a proxy is what's compromised, right? So we want to keep the goals, but we want to find new evaluation proxies. What might these evaluation proxies be? Well, here are two low-hanging fruit, as it were. The first is a custom GPT, LLMs loaded with course materials, right? Engagement over the answers. So this would facilitate conversation. This might be just as an assistive tool for course material, but it also can replace evaluation events. I've experimented with both. The second is the video oral defense. A lot of people have difficulty standing up in front of class and delivering a well thought out presentation, right? A lot of undergraduates really struggle with this. They're tense, they're uneasy. That really impacts the delivery. So what I've resorted to doing is to asking my students, okay, if you're uncomfortable speaking in front of class, that's fine. Just film yourself, right? Just tape yourself, videotape yourself with your phone, speaking for 10 minutes about a topic that either you choose and I approve, or that, I pre-assign. The only thing that I require is don't read off a page. You can use AI to prepare. You can use AI to write the text. You can use AI to do anything. At the end of the day, it's you, the camera, and 10 minutes of unadulterated free speech, not reading off a page. Once that becomes the requirement, it doesn't matter that you did your research with AI. You're supposed to speak for 10 minutes coherently about a topic. Some of it has made it through, right? Now, in the interest of honesty, I can say that once I have the videos, I can upload them to AI and have a prompt that breaks the presentation down according to factuality and according to delivery and according to all kinds of metrics that I'm interested in. Although for the same interest of honesty, I would say that I never defer to the judgment of AI, especially when that judgment is more critical than my own. So it's usually whoever offers the highest score wins between myself and AI. But it's always good to have another pair of eyes, even if they're virtual eyes, because you know how it is. Sometimes something just kind of rubs you the wrong way about a submission and you're kind of motivated to grade down, where in fact, if certain aspects of that submission were highlighted differently, you would be convinced to give a better grade. So AI is always there to serve as a counterpoint to my own little quirks in grading. So I often use it to help me. So I did prepare a small demonstration of, okay, and here it is. I hope it'll work. So I'm seeing something different on the screen than I am in my. Yep, here it is. Okay, so this is Introduction to the Early Middle Ages discussion group. I teach the course for 2 hours, then we lecture, and then for 2 hours we have a discussion group. And the discussion group is always based on a primary source that is tied to the historical period that we spoke of in the previous 2 hours. So I used to give them the primary source to read and then to prepare. And this was done with some degree of success, but now I've been trying to have them interact with this little bot instead. And if you want to see what lies under the hood of this bot, I can show it. Okay. Okay, so these are the instructions, right? Style length, how to tutor, what to nudge towards, and so on. And these are my lectures, right? So Jerome, Einhard, Augustine, Eusebius, the canon. And so, let's go back. I would just say, and I think this is kind of similar to what Anastasia was talking about. I do include a disclaimer. This tutor supports learning and discussion. It offers prompts, context, and guidance, not definitive final interpretations, verify claims against the text, and cite specific lines. Hi, what primary source would you like to discuss? And then I would say, so as you see, it doesn't bombard the student with information, right? It tries to encourage with questions. I too, like Anastasia, am struggling with what the sweet spot is between providing information and encouraging debate. Also, there's the question of trying to get it not to answer things that are irrelevant for the course. And this sometimes succeeds and sometimes it doesn't, because as you know, AIs can be kind of nudged into answering things that are not really for the best interest either of the student or of the university, right? So proceed with caution, that's what I would say, and really try these things out, right? Get the results, improve, and this is a trial and error process, so you need to know this going. So back to our. So I've discussed these two kind of easy fixes. The one is the custom GPT and the other is the video oral defense. I can say that AI enables continuous low stakes evaluation. And what do I mean by this? Usually our courses used to have a midterm assignment and then a final exam. And what I found that AI does is that it enables a lot of evaluation events that are more low stakes and that can be evaluated relatively easily without demanding that the professor start grading tons of the submissions and papers, and can really give you a good sense of where your students are at any specific point in the semester, so you can point out areas of difficulty. So I've kind of transitioned to a model of micro evaluation, as it were, more evaluation events, lower stakes. Okay. So the second solution that I've come up with, and that is becoming increasingly easier to formulate, are these bespoke educational labs. Used to be the case that building an app required developers, required knowledge of code, required a lot of resources. We all know that's becoming an obsolete assumption. Building apps now is really not that big of a deal. Everyone can do it. It's called vibe coding. Everybody tries it. Everybody does it. There are tons of tools. If this is a Google campus, then you can definitely try this out either with your Gemini chatbot or with the IDE, also the integrated developer environment, also provided by Google. It's called Anti-Gravity. It's free to download, and you can then use Gemini inside the command line interface. Some people don't like the terminal, okay? I can appreciate that. But if you get over yourself and try it out, you'll find that it can do a lot for you. Okay, so do try it out. But anyway, these are some of the things that I've done. Right? The first is Ecclesia, and here I will show you what it looks like. Ecclesia is an interactive game that I've developed. It's like an old school adventure. And basically, your role is to be the shepherd of a Christian community from the year 100 to the year 500. And you're meant to shepherd that community and grow its members and increase its cohesion. And you do this by making choices about historically contingent events. So I'll give you an example. Start the game, and then it says before you begin, you guide a small Christian community, yada yada. Okay, so this is it. It's scenarios, right? It's divided into 4 historical periods: the foundation era, the persecution era, the imperial era, and the decline era. And basically what you're asked to do is you're asked to make decisions, right? So here it's just the first instance, so it's just one decision. Junia, a weathered apostle from the east, arrives with parchments and so on, and so you make the decision. And then you're asked to reflect on your decision. So why does Junia insist on recording the names of the newly baptized? And so you make a decision, and then you confirm it, and then you see the result. And we've now gained 10 members to our community, and our cohesion dropped a little bit. Okay, and so as the game proceeds, you're faced to deal with increasingly complex situations. And the thing is that there are no wrong answers here. It's not really multiple choice. It just branches out into different eventualities. And so what this eventually produces is a JSON file, a JavaScript object notation file, which the students mail to me. And then I'm able to evaluate all of their choices and why they made those choices. And then I can give them a grade. Okay. So that's one of the games. The other is, just a minute. The other is shaping history. So I'll show you shaping history. So this is shaping history. It's ancient authors and their agendas. And what you're asked to do here is to choose an author between these two giants of late antique historiography, Eusebius of Caesarea and Augustine of Hippo. Which should I choose?
Definitely Augustine.
Augustine. Okay. Oh, hope you would say that. That's good. Okay, so this is Augustine writing his Confessions. Okay, and what I wanted to do here was to demonstrate to students that the personal circumstances of the author sometimes are very decisive in determining what kind of historiography they end up producing. In this case, the Confessions isn't really historiography. It's more like an introspective autobiography that is meant to be read as a call to believe, or I don't want to really get into that, but basically what it is, right? You're meant to make decisions. You're writing about your conversion. Why? What do you want the story to accomplish? Is it personal testimony? Is it breaking from Manichaeism? Is it teaching about conversion? And again, here, it's not about choosing right. It's just about choosing. So let's do teaching about conversion. And then what should other Christians learn from your conversion? Let's say can happen subtly. And then conversion is deeply personal and private. Okay, and then a new situation emerges, and then we're transported into a later point in Augustine's personal history, and then we're forced to deal with other things. Finally, and I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but if you want, I can give you a link and you can experiment with this yourself. It's all hosted on GitHub. It's entirely free. Anyone can use it. Anyone can give me feedback. You can clone the repository and develop on it yourself, whatever you want. So the point was that after having made these choices, they need to write the narrative as though they were Augustine. And again, a JSON file is formed and sent to me, and I can check whether their choices are consistent with what they ended up producing. Now, what's great about this is they can use ChatGPT however much they want. In the process of transferring the information from the app to ChatGPT back and forth, they learn. So it's good. I've accomplished my goal. Okay. So these were ecclesia and shaping history. Now, I want to make the case that when we look at computer code, it's really been a story of increasing abstraction, right? When we look at what software engineers, or rather computer engineers, were doing in the 1950s and then in the 1960s and 70s and so on, every new generation of software languages has been a further abstraction to the previous one. And every generation of software scientists and software engineers have been telling the next generation, oh, what you're doing isn't really coding, right? Because you're not managing memory, because you're not dealing with punch cards, whatever it is. And so now we're at a point where natural language is the language of choice, right? I think now the best code is clear, specific English. And I insist on it being clear and specific because it really forces you to really zero in on what it is that you want the coding agent to do for you. And here, if I might be so bold, I would say that humanities scholars have a little edge on the rest because we're all about language. It's called large language models for a reason. We're trained to inquire about and investigate the biases inherent to language and so on. And so actually research has shown that software engineers are not the best prompters. And the people who deal with language are actually the best prompters. I'm not going to say historians, I mean anthropologists and legal experts and so on, but you kind of see where I'm going with this, right? All right. So now I come to faculty. As with every, every new technology, there are those who are early adopters, right? And those people you know about because they make themselves known to you. And then there are the diehard opposition, and those people, I mean, it's very worthwhile to engage with them because a lot of the time their criticism is grounded and you need to hear it. But you're not going to convince them, right? But then there's the vast majority of people who are the swinging vote. They need a clear value proposition to be convinced. And I think what I've tried to do in Bar-Ilan is to use the early adopters to get to the hesitant majority, right? The first thing that we did was try workshops. I mean, we're teachers, so we want to teach. So we convene workshops, and workshops do not work, okay? They don't. And they don't work for a reason. And the reason is that people tend to self-diagnose their capability. And that self-diagnosis is often imprecise. And so people would show up to an advanced class and, the whole thing would devolve into prompting basics within 15 minutes. Secondly, expertise in doing those workshops effectively is either expensive or rare. People leave those workshops leaving empowered and great, and within 2 weeks they forget everything they've been taught, because they don't practice. So there's no follow. And I think they're still useful for very specific, very targeted objectives, but in more cases, workshops are not the solution. So what is it? Well, the solution as it emerged at Bar-Ilan was really a very modest one and was WhatsApp groups, right? I don't know how popular WhatsApp is in the US. I'm told it's not very popular, but I mean, you do have group chats. And so what I do is I admin a WhatsApp group. It's currently got about 280 faculty and staff. And basically it's a place to share experiences. So we share tools that have worked and tools that haven't worked. And if there are great sales for subscriptions, we share that too. And we talk about the philosophy of teaching with AI, and we fight and we make up. It's great. And it's completely free, right? And it's really a vibrant community of like-minded people who argue and talk and share experiences. And I can't really relate to you how much value I've derived from this WhatsApp group. It's a really modest solution, but it's something that's been wonderful for us. And it's something that I call upon you to start yourselves, even if it's on a department level, but it can be on an institutional level. For us, it's called the Bar-Ilan Community Learns AI, in Hebrew, obviously. And so I've also made it a rule not to restrict posting to only admins. If you've got something interesting, just share it, right? And if it's not as interesting as you think initially, then the community will let you know, right? But at the end of the day, we found out that there's a hardcore of people that do most of the posting. And those are the early adopters. Those are the anchor people in your departments, in your schools, and those are the people that you reach out to when you want anchor persons to leverage AI in those smaller, right, institutional levels. So yeah, it's been great. Another thing that we've done is we've initiated a course. And this is different from a lecture because it is longer and it requires a lot more investment. And we've really thought about how the process after the last day of the course will turn out to be. And we've called this High AI. And it is a course on AI and deep tech. It involves workshops, teaching, but also days where we interact with special guests from the industry. So we've brought in speakers from Google, from Microsoft, from the burgeoning startup scene that we have locally. And that's been great. Here also, and these were people who were aggressively selected. The first cohort was from STEM. We ended up selecting 35 people who have self-diagnosed as proficient with AI. I don't know how proficient they were. But at the end of the day, I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? We tailored our response to the level that emerged from the course. And we gave them a lot of homework, right? But not homework that's just for the sake of being cruel, homework that was tailored to their own needs in their labs. So they basically made up their own homework. And so they were incentivized and motivated to come back with these products, then we could evaluate them. So this is now concluding, and I don't really have very definite results for this, but it seems as though a lot of the scholars that were involved in the first cohort are finding value in it because they've actually developed tools in chemistry, by the way. That's been really one of the greatest achievers. And so, yeah, we have high hopes for that. The second cohort will be humanities and social sciences. So we're expanding beyond STEM. And I mean, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so finally, I want to talk about research, and that's going to be my final topic. I don't know, how am I for time? I'm really kind of pushing it, aren't I? Okay, well, we'll keep going until you stop. I think we've experienced a kind of silent revolution in the last 3 to 4 months. And this isn't appreciated enough. This is the agentic revolution, right? The AI as agents. And what this is we're used to thinking about ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic or whatever it is as a web app that we drag our context into it, right? We would have a file that we wanted Claude to read, so we would drag the file into Claude. And what agents enable us to do is to turn the lens 180 degrees and now unleash our AI on our own context, on our own files. So I don't know if you've been keeping up to date with the OpenClaw thing. Maybe after in the Q&A, I'll talk to you about agents and their dating site and their religion and all the crazy things that have happened with OpenClaw. But anyway, what happens is that when we drag one file or even 10 files into ChatGPT or whatever the chatbot is, it's very difficult to create a comprehensive sense of context, right? But when we have, I don't know, a folder with 80 articles containing everything that we think everybody's ever said about a specific topic, and we just let AI roam through that folder, it emerges with a much more nuanced, much richer sense of context, which leads to minimized hallucinations and which leads to a much better discussion. And this context management has become the actionable skill as far as I'm concerned. It used to be people talked about prompt engineering and so on, and prompts are important to an extent, but they're only an extension of context management. And this is really the proficiency that I'm trying to inculcate in students, is how to think about context and how to manage context, okay? So this changes workflows fundamentally, and it's something that I think needs to be appreciated for what it is. Now, one way I've come to work with AI is to do messy brain dumps. I know this sounds pretty bad, But sometimes I have an inkling, like I know that there's something in what I'm thinking, but I can't really vocalize it. So what I do is I just use voice dictation. I use Whisperflow, but there are tons of other products that anyone can use, and just talk for as long as I can produce narrative, right? 5 minutes, 6, 7 minutes, whatever it is. It's messy, it's circular, it's unpolished, it doesn't look like anything, but I know somewhere in that mess there is a good idea. Now, as humanities scholars, we're all about, polished prose, and we like our ideas to be elegant, but we're actually doing a disservice to ourselves here because AI is very good at introducing order into chaos. It's not very good at coming up with new innovative ideas. But if we have the idea, even if it's a very rough, unpolished idea, we can just give it to the AI and say, okay, just reflect back to me what it is that you think that I'm saying here. And out of that chaos emerges something that is worth exploring, that is worth elaborating. Okay. And it really forces us to think about substance and not presentation. And so there's been this consistent fear that AI will make us obsolete. And I don't think that's the case, really. I think if we insist on two core proficiencies, and these are agency and judgment, which are really the same in a different guise, we can own the process. So agency means deciding what you want AI to do for you or what you want AI to study. And judgment is the other end of the process, right? Is evaluating if what AI gave you is either good or bad or somewhere in between. And so AI automates the road from agency to judgment, but every decision, whether small or large, in the ideation process and the composition process is framed by agency and by judgment, and those two are human. They're explicitly human, right? Myself as a historian, I can say I think that one direction is profitable and another isn't. So I exercise agency. And then I give out something to AI, it comes back and I can say, this isn't what I meant, or this is exactly what I meant. And that is where my judgment comes into action. Okay, so AI connects agency, but it doesn't replace it, and it connects agency and judgment, but it doesn't replace either. Okay, so now I've come to this point in the talk where I want to show you some of the research products that I've come up with. I have two that I want to show you. The first is the Alcuin Epistolary Network, and the second is the Gregory of Tours Stem. So Alcuin, as many of you may know, was a scholar under Charlemagne and the Carolingian, very much associated with the Carolingian Renaissance in the late 8th, early 9th centuries. And he left us an impressive collection of letters, right? And so these letters contain pretty much a network of all of the who's and who of the Carolingian elite, and also people from Anglo-Saxon England and elsewhere. And it's been really hard to string these people together, and that would have taken a doctoral student years to do. So what I've done is basically I've given Gemini, I think it was, I've given Gemini the MGH Latin edited version of the letters, and I asked it to produce a network. And I want to show you the network. But to do this, I'm going to need to no, not working. Oh, here it is. So just a second. So here it is. So what I've done here is I have a network of all the people that Alcuin wrote to, and I can filter it by time, I can look at the connections between different people and how many nodes separate them. All of the nodes that are unnamed are people that are mentioned in letters but are not addressees of actual letters. And I can do a ton of manipulation here. And every time I hover over one of these people, I get not only their bio, but also the actual letters in which they appear, right? So building something like this 5 years ago would have required a team of developers. This is an afternoon, right? This is a weekend project at most. So this was something that I did and I thought was of value. Another product that I did was, I'm sorry about going back and forth with presentation, but this is the interactive manuscript stem. So this is the network layout. I want to show you the tree layout. Okay, so Gregory of Tours was a bishop in 6th century Gaul, and he's probably one of the most important sources of information we have about the Merovingian era. And he left us a book, or rather 10 books of history written in the final decade of the 6th century. And this book has a very complicated manuscript history. And so trying to teach and illustrate it and explain this complicated history is pretty difficult. And so I've come up with this resource that illuminates the different relationships between the various manuscript families, the classes. And wherever there's evidence from the source, it sends you directly to the MGH, to the Latin edition, so you can validate it yourself. And I only show this not to show off, but because validation is important. So you need to introduce into the apps that you develop mechanisms that allow the users to validate the experience. Otherwise, the suspicion that this is hallucination persists. So it's important to do this, right? Okay. So I think if we have to extract some lessons from everything that I've presented here today, and this is of course an institutional choice, but I think it's a necessary one, is that AI should be opt-out and not opt-in. By default, you should permit it. Build trust through transparency declarations, do whatever you have to, but assume that AI is out of the bag and it's here to stay. Secondly, we need to think about redesigning assessment through and around core skills. Yeah, this could mean low-hanging fruit like custom GPTs. It could mean oral defenses. It could mean bespoke apps, whatever it is. Upskilling faculty is achieved through community building, not through workshops. What a WhatsApp group did outperformed formal teaching in more ways than I can count. It surfaces early adopters, and those people are key for leveraging AI on an institutional level. The fourth point is to point AI at your context, using agents and transforming AI into an essential operating system, right? Not dragging files into the chat, but letting AI traverse your own environment. And finally, to keep agency and judgment human. AI connects the two, but it replaces neither. So this is essentially an optimistic take, and one that I believe in the persistence of the human endeavor, right, in light of AI. So AI doesn't eliminate the need for human skill. It eliminates a lot of the busy work that's been masquerading as skill. Start small. So thanks. Yeah.
Okay, lots of things for us to think about. Joe.
I have a lot of questions, but one I wanted to start with is I like your take-home points at the end. Point number 3, where you're trying to upskill faculty, and I get that, you said it very beautifully that they're going to forget things a couple of weeks later, because if you're not actually exercising it on your own project. So my question is, the WhatsApp group, do you have a sense for the time commitment that the people are putting into that to answer each other's community questions? You know, I mean, are we asking the early adopters, the core who are answering everybody else's questions, spend X hours a week? I know it's fun to do, but it's a time thing.
That's been actually the engine of the whole thing, that it's fun to do.
Yeah.
So I've admin this out of, you know, I just something that I wanted to do. I had so much to say, and this was a captive audience, so I unleashed my fury upon them. And the other people that emerged were also people that did it for fun. No one in this group is materially incentivized to participate. It's just something that emerged organically. And it turns out that so many people have so much to say, so many strongly held convictions and opinions that it turned out to be this like hotbed of discussion, and we would all fight and we would all make up, and it was great. And I mean, you might think of when you start out to have a bunch of admins that start small. We didn't also we recognize a lot of people are busy, they're busy in their personal lives, so we didn't want to overburden them with all of this.
Mhm.
So at least at first, I really thought hard about when to post to the group for it not to be intrusive. But then I think convention kind of emerged, that there are times in the day where this is appropriate, and then there are times of the day where it isn't. Bar-Ilan is like Catholic. It is it's a religious university, right? And so like on the Sabbath, I wouldn't post. Not because this would not have been accepted well, it's just that I didn't want people who observe to miss out on the discussion, right? So, the rules of engagement kind of developed organically, as it were. So you can start small and see what happens. That would be my advice.
Thanks.
So I love vibe coding and using AI models and all sorts of things. My only issue that I've had in the past is creating software that other people can use.
Okay, yeah.
Using LLMs like Gemini, like AI Studio, whatever it's called from Google. And then it's calling Gemini, it gets pretty expensive. What have your workarounds been, and how can we like create sustainable models that are actually permanent? Rather than just creating these like temporary toys.
So that's a very good question. There's a chasm that exists between vibe coding as a hobby and creating like industrial grade software. Whenever you think about software that will endure, there needs to be someone who makes sure that it does. So updating the API keys, doing all the back end stuff, that's all true. There are some ways to work around this. One is to try to keep your apps simple. I know that's a temptation that's often hard to resist, is adding functionality, because you just want to do it, right? But you need to keep it simple. Best to keep it front end heavy, right? Like just an index.html file that does most of the heavy lifting. And when that's the case, you can just host it on GitHub for free and let everybody use it. And then if someone wants to add on functionality, they can clone the repo and do it themselves. And that's their problem now, right? But if you're really thinking about heavy coding, even with coding agents, you need to get IT involved and have it hosted on like university servers and see what kind of institutional support you can get for it. And then it becomes a community issue, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question about the on-site software. You see that it's outside for professors, but what about the people who write the secondary literature who's posted on the website that is being followed by the internet? What about the students who are giving their likeness, not knowing how they're going to use it? And do they have the chance to opt out their voices, their creation, their intellectual property?
Yeah. Okay, so you raise an important point. The ethics of AI are a complicated question, and I don't mean to make light of it. And so I'll try to answer your question, and we'll see how far we get. Okay. Firstly, if any student voices their opposition to using AI, then I'm fine with them not using it. Okay, so I'm not going to insist on it as the same that I don't insist on professors using it. So they have the liberty to refuse, and it will not affect their grade. Okay, so that needs to be put out there. Secondly, as far as training on your info goes, so most of the academic products that we use, I think for most of my students, it's ChatGPT educational tier. By default, doesn't train on your data, okay? And if you're concerned about AI on the other subscriptions training on your data, you can deactivate that. And you lose no functionality as a result. You just go to settings and deactivate that, and you're out of the training. But people, I think, mistake their info being trained as something nefarious, when in fact, it really isn't. It's not as bad as people think. So what people are actually saying is that you take a banana and dates and I don't know, whatever it is that you like in your shake, and you throw it into the blender, and then you do the blending, and then you reach in and pull out a whole banana. And that never happens, right? What happens to our data is that it's essentially atomized. What AI is looking for is semantic correlations. It's not looking for your next bright idea for a book. That's not what's happening. The only instance where I would say that is a concern is where you have like proprietary data in the form of experimental data, like long strings of numbers that are unique. Then it's a concern. And then I would urge you either to anonymize, which is a workflow that is easily reproducible, or to use the kind of security that makes that concern less severe, like using on-prem local models, right? If you're very worried about your data, you can just download an open source model and do everything on your own computer instead of sending everything into OpenAI servers or whatever it is. So there's definitely ways of using AI in a way that doesn't expose students. All of that being said, I still recognize that there's a problematic component to all of this. As you all know, Anthropic signed a settlement agreement to the tune of $1.5 billion with authors for books that have been pirated, right? So there's definitely something that needs addressing. And I think it is in the interest of the industry as a whole to reach some kind of, status quo that is acceptable to all parties. I don't know how that's going to shake out. We'll see. I definitely have my own opinions about the more predatory aspects of publishers asking / requiring authors to give up their intellectual property so that the AI labs can train on it. But definitely, I think 2026 is going to be a decisive year as far as the courts and what they decide on what is permitted and what is not permitted as far as the uses of data are concerned.
What basically what you're saying is trust that Sam Altman, and when we see his history and what he's done, with his company and the people who work for him, actually coded that little toggle to do what he says it's going to do, when at the same time he stole Scarlett Johansson's voice and into a huge situation. And I mean, there's a lot of trusting going on, and I think trusting it with your own work is one thing, but putting students there and then
what are students actually putting in the box? They're putting their opinions about Justinian's reconquest. They're not putting their own medical information in there. If they want to do that, they do that on their own time and at their own risk. I don't expect them to do this. I don't ask them to do this. In fact, what I do is I train them to be cautious. As far as ScarJo is concerned, I mean, she can take care of herself. She's a little girl. But I think this is part of our reality, right? It used to be the case that we were very hesitant of putting our credit cards online, right? Now we can't go a day without giving like a delivery from Amazon or whatever. This all depends on trust. Democratic societies run on trust. Contractual law runs on trust. Everything is trust, right? Money is trust. So at a certain point, we need to trust the machines, given that we do have regulatory mechanisms in place to enforce certain things. So, I mean, if you're very worried, I would say take the measures necessary to protect yourself. But I think at a certain point, you need to kind of split the difference and see where, you know, the most advantage lies. And I think trusting OpenAI that when you toggle off, it really doesn't train on your data is kind of low stakes. I'm comfortable with that. But I recognize that if you're not, that's absolutely fine. We're not all the same. That's okay.
John?
Yeah, so I was kind of interested in the custom GPT that you have for class.
Yep.
And I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about maybe what the students have said about this, like what do they like? Is there a certain aspect, like is it the responsiveness that they can do it, you know, whenever they're not like emailing you at 2 in the morning when they're like panicking about a
Yeah.
you know thing. So like sort of what is it that sort of is grabbing them about that?
They like that it's there. That's reassuring to them. You know, sometimes they're kind of embarrassed to email you.
Right.
They're Israeli, so they're not very embarrassed, but they're at certain points, they might be like, I don't know if I want to trouble this person now. There's a lot of things that, you know, we covered this a million times, so I feel awkward asking this again. I made sure to introduce into the bot like administrative information about the structure of the exam and when my office hours are and the duties of the course and so on, so that they don't have to ask. Like the syllabus is in there, the training data, everything's there. So they like that. Sometimes they didn't like the tone. It was like it just asks too many questions. I just want answers, right? And actually, I found that feedback to be helpful. So I went back and I recalibrated the bot to be more in tune with what they expect. And so, you know, that went over well. I can say that at least at a certain point, it underperformed for STEM courses, right? The models weren't up to spec on solving the kinds of problems that our students were dealing with. I understand that's better now. I'm not going to say it's resolved, but the LLMs are better at doing that. It's kind of funny because you do get the news in the media that LLM is now solving like top-notch math equations and so on, the Erdos problems. And on the other hand, it can't, you know, it can't do simple multiplication when I give it the prompt. So maybe I'm doing something wrong. But if I'm doing it wrong, then I assume other people are too. So yeah, like I said before, this needs to be like an iterative process, and you kind of need to constantly be getting feedback from your students to try and gauge what they like and what they dislike, and you know, make the adjustments accordingly.
I think
Have you done any A/B testing, like creating a control and seeing teaching outcomes using some of these AI models?
We have, when we did the pilot, we did some of that. The thing is that ChatGPT, which was the basis of the custom GPTs platform, really doesn't let you tweak it a whole lot, right? It's a very restricted platform. It only gives you 20 files to upload. It only gives you so much leverage here and there. So, I mean, you can call it A/B testing, but it really was very limited. Now that we have these tools at our disposal, I think A/B testing might prove a very useful methodology, but I can say that we haven't really deployed this at a scale that is adequate. But definitely, that's a good suggestion.
I was curious about the last two apps that you showed for your own research.
Yeah,
So that was all done by vibe coding or
Claude Code, yeah.
Claude coding. So I'm curious, the output, you know, is really kind of graph theory.
Yeah, that's
So
the
when
theory, yeah.
when you asked to analyze this, did you include that, or was this something it came up with? Like, this is a way that you can visualize this using graph theory with nodes and edges.
I mean, I'm gonna say I came up with it. Most of it was kind of already in my head when I started prompting. I usually follow a very specific workflow when I do these things. I have a preliminary conversation with a chatbot about what it is that I want.
Yeah.
But I insist that the first idea is mine. Like I don't come up to it and say, I don't know anything, just suggest 10 things and I'll pick numbers 2 and 8 or whatever. So, and once I have an idea, then I'll start talking with it and try to hammer it out. And then once I have a good idea of what I want the app to be, then I would have the model come up with a PRD, a product requirements document, which is a staple of software development and actually product development as well. Basically, it's a guidebook that contains everything that this app is supposed to do, like where the buttons are, what the functionality is, what the training data is, what the context is, all of it. And then once I have that document, then I'll start building the software. So I can tell you that most times it's been like that. The only exception is that in the Stemma app, it came up with 2 modalities. I wanted the tree stemma and it came up with the other thing, but I'm not crazy about it. I will not be eclipsed, but I'm kidding. But, it came up with that. So I left it in.
I mean, I don't think it's all bad. I think that if you're not thinking of things quantitatively and provide a quantitative solution, that it actually expands your imagination of what
That's
you
true.
do.
Even though it kind of also forces you to really specify what it is that you want. A lot of people go into certain problems thinking that they know what they want, and it's only when they're forced to actually articulate it that they're faced with a reality that actually there are some dark spots that they need to shed light on and decide what it is that they want. So yeah, I think vibe coding is a very good process where you have a inchoate idea, like something very fuzzy, and you kind of bring it to fruition through back and forth with the model. And having a very fuzzy idea on a Friday and having a working app on a Sunday is just like an experience that I can't like you have to try it to understand what it's like, and it's just so much fun. So yeah, I would definitely urge you to give it a try, especially since all of the resources are in place for you to do it.
All right, so I think we should end there with fun weekend project and thank Professor Fox again. Yes, and please